welcome to tonight's Hope reading, Light and Darkness reading, which is, of course, the continuation of the story of Hope. I know we're getting started a little later tonight, but I do hate to miss a day if I don't have to. Especially chapters like the ones we're looking at tonight. Chapter 16, Alva, the Diplomat. The next morning, the company rose early. They planned to get to the military camp early, assess it, and start training immediately. Alva was sitting at a table in the tavern with Pinsir, Prior, and Neera. Hope had insisted on helping in the kitchen. She had enjoyed cooking on the journey to Creston, and she had never washed dishes. As it happened, kitchen work came as naturally to Hope as everything else, and she enjoyed it almost as much as she did everything else. Alva joked about all the privileges Hellel had withheld from her. Salia was busy running around and serving the large crowd. Hellel, Diron, and Bonson had not yet arrived. After a while, Bonson came through the door, and Alva immediately noticed that his appearance had dramatically changed. This was mostly because he had a clean shave, and his hair had been cut short and combed. Lately he had been wearing loose and drab-looking clothes, but this morning he wore a fine and expensive embroidered shirt of bright colors. His eyes had changed too. While they still looked sad and tired, their look was not one of despair. Bonson saw them and began to walk toward their table. At that moment, Salia came back out of the back room, carrying a tray full of food and steaming drinks. She was in such a bustle that she did not even notice Bonson until he said, "Good morning, Salia," while walking behind her. She turned to acknowledge him, and when she saw him, she started and dropped her tray. It fell to the ground, accompanied by the sound of clanging metal. Luckily, they use metal plates and metal cups rather than glass for most drinks. Salia blushed deeply and immediately stooped down without speaking. Bonson knelt beside her. "Do you need help cleaning that up?" he asked. "No," she said in a fluster. Do you need me to get you some rags or something?" "No." "Well, can I," he began. "Shoo!" she interrupted, waving him away with her hand. Bonson rose and went to the table where the others were sitting. The three men were all holding their breath to keep from roaring with laughter. Salia picked up the dishes, put them on a tray, and went back into the back room for rags to clean up the mess. After she walked through the back door, they could hold it in no more. They all burst out laughing. As Bonson sat down, Prior said, "Wow, Lord Bonson, I forgot how pretty you are." "I'm almost handsome," Bonson said. "Let's not get carried away," Pinsir said. Alva looked at Bonson and raised his eyebrows as if to say, "What's going on?" Bonson just shrugged his shoulders and smiled. When they had finished breakfast and were preparing to leave, Hellel came through the door. His eyes had a look of urgency, and he was usually so even-keel that they knew something must be happening. He motioned them out of doors, and when they were in the street, he told them what was going on. "Our lookouts have spotted a group of soldiers coming in through the pass. There are not enough of them to launch an attack, so it is probably a negotiator sent to offer terms. I wanted to know, Alva, if you wanted me to speak with him." "Thank you, Lord Hellel. I prefer to speak with him myself. This means we must put off training for a while. I ride for the military camp guarding the pass immediately. Lord Hellel, Bonson, Prior, and Pinsir come with me. Diron, make sure the training camp is in order while we are away. Neera, stay here and guard Hope." "May I please come, Alva?" Hope asked. "There are sure to be Dachmanim with them." "I suspect they do not mean to attack with a small force," Alva said, "but you can come if you like. Just stay disguised in a long cloak, and whatever happens, don't show yourself unless I signal you to do so. And I mean no matter what happens. I don't want you to be revealed prematurely." "Thank you," Hope said. "I understand." Alva's group mounted their horses and set out at full gallop for the military camp. When they arrived, it was well into the afternoon. They were greeted by Jagrok, who oversaw this camp. The Dachmonian group had recently arrived and sent a messenger to say that the Dachmonian ambassador would like to speak to a representative of King Philon. The messenger was awaiting instructions when they arrived. Alva told him to go back and tell the ambassador that Alva Dene would speak with him privately on the slopes of the mountain between the Lacinian camp and his guard. Each man would be allowed 4 companions who would stay a certain distance back while the men negotiated. This was at the Dachmonian ambassador's request, and Alva thought he had a pretty good idea of the reason for it. Alva would be accompanied by Pinsir, Prior, Hellel, and Bonson. Alva walked out with Pinsir on his right and Hellel on his left. Next to Pinsir was Prior, and next to Hellel was Bonson. As the 5 men walked toward the appointed place, the ambassador began to walk toward them from his group of soldiers. He was accompanied by 4 black knights in full armor, with visors down. As Alva had expected, they were Dachmonim. The ambassador himself walked slowly with a cane. He was an old man, pale and wrinkled and bald. He wore clothes of black with silver trim. This was the same ambassador that had visited Philon IV at his palace. As the 2 groups walked toward each other, Alva's escort began to tremble slightly. "I think you fellas better stop here," Alva said quietly when they were about 100 yards distance from the other group. "His escort isn't stopping," Bonson said. "I know, and I don't want them to see you men rattling in your armor. That isn't the message we want to send." "And you?" Prior asked. "You see me shaken? Now listen, men," he said. "Do not, under any circumstances, take another step forward unless I signal you to do so. Understood?" "Understood," they all said in unison. The ambassador's escort stopped less than 10 feet behind him. Alva and the ambassador walked close to one another and looked each other over very carefully. The ambassador was unarmed except for his cane, but he seemed very confident in his escort. Alva wore a breastplate of shining steel over his Dene uniform. In the center of the chest it had a large D of the same script as the one on his shoulder and sword hilt, the Dene crest. On his belt was his father's sword and dagger, both with shining silver hilts. "I expected the famous Alva Dene to be a little more impressive in appearance," the ambassador began. "We can't all have your looks," Alva responded. This made the ambassador burst into a hoarse, shrill laugh. "Allow me to come to the point," the ambassador said. "In a fit of madness, King Tyagon has committed treason against his emperor, which now means he has committed treason against Dachmon. He will be dealt with accordingly. However, I see that some in this land are caught up in this madness. I have come to tell you that if you lay down your arms, your land will not be punished for Tyagon's treason. Instead, you will be peacefully assimilated into the empire of Dachmon, just as Hurin has." "Anything else?" Alva asked. "No, I believe that is all." Alva's eyes now turned to steel as he spoke in a clear and commanding tone. "Thank you for coming to the point. Now let me return your favor. His Majesty, King Tyagon, the True, the Savior of Lassania, has abdicated his throne to King Phylon IV, who now rules Lassania according to the rights of his ancient line. I am Alva Dene, the son of Al-Salah Dene the 26th. I speak for His Majesty King Phylon. My message to you is this. Any Dachmonian, or any man who serves Dachmon, will be graciously allowed to keep his life as long as he does not set foot in Lassania. But any servant of Dachmon who enters Lassania will die. You and your company will be allowed to leave safely so that you may deliver this message to your Dachmanon." "Is that all?" the ambassador asked. "That about covers it." "It is unfortunate that Phylon chose a fool with no experience as his military commander," the ambassador said. As he spoke, there was the slightest twitch in his left pinky, and the 4 Dachmanim began to advance with their eyes fixed on Alva. Seeing them move, Bonson and Prior started to step forward despite their fear, but their arms were grabbed by Hellel and Pinsir respectively. "He didn't signal us," Hellel said. "Could he have forgotten?" Bonson asked. "A Dene don't forget something like that," Pinsir said. "He knows what he's doing." "Does that necessarily mean he won't get himself killed?" Prior asked. "No," Pinsir replied. "But I don't think he means to die today." As the Dachmanim walked toward Alva, something seemed wrong to them. He showed no sign of fear, rather he looked at them with challenge in his eyes. As the Dachmanim had walked out in the beginning, Alva had distinctively noticed that he was not afraid. He did not know whether this was because he had spent so much time in Hope's presence, or whether their power over him was broken by what happened at the dry lake. What mattered was that the fear they wielded did not affect him. The Dachmanim were not easily unsettled, however. In addition to their dark power, they were all highly skilled warriors. The ambassador had deliberately brought Alva in contact with them so that, if Alva would not negotiate, he could be dealt with quickly and easily. He had not expected Alva's escort to stay so far behind, but this only made the plan that much easier. Each of the Dark Warriors had a sword and shield. As they drew their swords and approached him, Alva's keen eye quickly spotted all the weak points in their armor. He crossed his arms over his body and drew his sword and dagger simultaneously. Then raised his chin slightly, inviting them to come forward. At that moment, they all rushed him. Alva immediately dashed like lightning to the warrior on the far left. He brought down his sword, and as the warrior blocked the blow with his own sword, Alva parried the dark blade to the right, stepped in with his left foot, and plunged his dagger through a groove in the armpit of the armor, piercing his right lung. The next warrior had darted around behind the first and swung his sword downward at the top of Alva's head. But Alva quickly stepped back, pivoting on his right foot. As the second warrior's sword came down, Alva spun his body around and cut off his head, perfectly striking the weakest point where the armor connected the helmet. The third warrior's attack had already begun. He moved forward and stabbed straight at Alva. but Alva parried the blade downward to the right with his own sword, then stepped in with his left foot and drove his dagger downward into the warrior's heart, piercing through the groove that connected his helmet and breastplate. In an instant, 3 of the Dachmanim had already fallen. The 4th warrior was more cautious. He squared off as Alva held his sword and dagger forward in an on-guard position. After about 2 seconds of looking at one another, the warrior attacked, bringing down his sword. Alva blocked the blow above his head by crossing his blades, and kicked the warrior in the stomach with his right foot. Despite the armor, this kick made the warrior double over. Alva parried the warrior's sword to the side with his right hand, stepped in, and drove his dagger into the back of his neck. Within seconds, the 4 Dachmanim had fallen. The ambassador had never entered a negotiation without at least one of the Dachmanim over his shoulder. Now it was his turn to tremble. As Alva looked him in the eye, his body shook all over, causing his wrinkles to dance and jiggle. With his Dachmanim, he looked quite frightening. Now he looked comical. You dare to come into the Light Kingdom and try to intimidate our people with your dark warriors? Alva said. You deserve to die, but I don't kill cowards who hide behind other men. Instead, go back and tell your Dachmanon how his Dachmanim will be dealt with if they dare to set foot on this sacred soil. Despite the ambassador's trembling, his arrogance was not all gone. He croaked out, You think that just because you know some sword tricks that you're a military general? What I said before was true, Alva. You are a fool, and I promise you that before this war is over, you will die screaming. Ah, Alva said, you've seen Lord Benel. The ambassador looked confused when Alva said this. His eyes revealed that he had seen Lord Benel, but he did not understand why Alva would know that. I'm beginning to lose patience, Ambassador, Alva said again. Turn around and go back to your soldiers as fast as your cane will carry you. Then instruct your carriage driver to take you back at full gallop, with your men following behind. If I see your horses walking, I will have my riders run you down and skew you like so many pieces of chicken. Leave now. The ambassador turned to obey as quickly as possible. As he did, Bonson turned toward the Lassanian camp. He drew his sword, held it straight in the air, and shouted, Alva Dene, the shield of the free people of Lassania. Alva for Phylon, for Lassania, and for the hope of all men. The men all cheered wildly, and under Bonson's leadership they began to chant his name. Alva, 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 Alva. Hope had been very afraid when the 4 Dachmanim attacked Alva. She wanted to intervene, but she remembered what he had told her. And, like Pinsir, she knew he would not forget something like that. But she had been overwhelmed with joy at his victory, and now she was caught up in the moment, chanting Alva's name along with the men. She assumed her voice would be drowned out in the crowd, but it rang clear above all the others. She wore a cloak with the hood pulled up and pulled in front of her face so that only her eyes showed. But without knowing it, she began to glow. Her light was dimly visible under the cloak, and a beam shot straight out of her eye opening. Because she was looking at Alva, the beam went directly to him. Hope had meant to keep herself hidden, but this accident caused all the soldiers to forget about Alva as they turned to look at the source of the light. Hope began to feel embarrassed, and wondered whether Alva would be unhappy that she had accidentally revealed herself, even though the Dachmonians were already on the run. As she stood there glowing, Alva turned and walked toward her. She watched him as he walked all the way to where she was standing. There was nothing in his eyes but love. When he reached her, he took her hand, kissed it, then turned to the crowd and said, "What Lord Bonson said was true. Alva for the hope of all men. Behold your heroine." Then the men cheered once again, this time for hope. Chapter 17. Neera receives unsatisfactory replies. "Why are they cheering for me?" Hope asked Alva when the noise from the crowd of soldiers finally started to die down. "Why wouldn't they?" Alva asked in return. Hope was slightly embarrassed and changed the subject. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Well," Alva said with a smile, "my right arm is feeling a little numb. I might need you to hold my hand for a few hours." Hope glowed pink. "You don't need to make up stories to get me to do that," she said with a shy smile. "I have to be careful under Neera's watchful eye," Alva joked. "Yes, because you are always trying to get away with something," Neera said in mock sarcasm. "I know," Hope said in pretend annoyance. "Be that as it may," Neera said with a look toward Hellel, "I am certainly ready for my guard duties to be done." Hellel did not reply. "You didn't seem afraid of them at all," Hope said. "I wasn't," Alva said. "Not today." "How can that be?" Pinsir asked. "There were 4 of them, and at the dry lake, just one was enough to make you afraid with the rest of us." "I can't exactly explain why," Alva said, "but I have my suspicions. It just might be that all the time I've spent with Hope has neutralized their power, but I think it goes deeper than that." They all leaned in toward him, anticipating what he might say. Hope was especially eager to understand. "I think," Alva continued, that dark warrior's power killed me that day at the dry lake. I've heard the story over and over from Hope and Neera. They thought I was dead, and I think they were right. I think Hope's power and love brought me back. Somehow, I think that coming back from a death brought on by the dark power has broken the dark power over me." This theory certainly did account for all the facts. They stood for some time in silence, pondering what Alva had said. At length, Prior said, "Great! Now we all just have to die, and then we can beat them too." They stayed in the military camp that night, planning to ride back to the training camp in the morning. Alva determined that in the next 2 weeks the training camp should be moved out to become part of the military camp. It would take some time for Dachmon to be prepared for a major attack, but he thought the sooner the men were there, the better. Balsasanar could arrange for all their supplies, and this would need to be arranged soon enough anyway. Bonson was having a good day. For the first time since he had known Alva, he was able to share in the pleasure of one of his incredible feats of swordsmanship. This time he felt no envy, and because he had a good vantage point, and his swordsman's eye understood and remembered every move Alva had made, he was called upon to tell the story over and over. He even acted it out with 4 volunteers to show exactly what Alva had done. This was helpful because, when asked about the fight, Alva just said, "It all happened so fast, I don't remember." Bonson told them this was just his way of being humble, annoying though it was. At dinner, Bonson said to Alva, "I'm sure glad you didn't have the dagger during our duel. Then I wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes." "I was lucky that day," Alva said. "And every other day since any of us has met you," Prior said with a laugh. "But you two did have quite a close duel." "Only because we were fighting in my comfort zone," Bonson said. It was a tournament-style broadsword fight. I've spent my life in those when Alva was fighting in real fights. I never noticed you having any trouble in a real fight, Alva said. I felt like it when you killed 11 to my 4, Bonson replied. They all came at me because they were afraid of you big fellas, Alva said. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten any more than you and Pryor. There's a new way of looking at it, Pryor laughed, and I, for one, accept it as true without question. The allusion to their fight in the Kuragan Hills was heard by some nearby soldiers, and Bonson and Pryor had to spend the evening telling that story over and over as well. After dinner, Neera spoke to Alva. A great fight, as always today, Alva, but as our military leader, should you take risks like that? She knew this wasn't exactly the kind of thing she should say in front of his generals, but she did not know when she might be able to speak to him alone. Besides, they were all friends, and she was now considered a queen in this land, though it was a title she never claimed. Wars aren't won without risks, Alva replied. I understand that, but surely your father did not fight from the front lines. Neera knew she was pushing the limits of propriety, but felt she needed to make her point. Alva held Neera in such reverence that he did not take the slightest offense. He spoke in a friendly tone that let her know he was happy to explain himself. Neera, he said, you never met my father. No, I didn't, she said. Well, let me tell you a little about him. There was a power in his presence. When he spoke, men automatically listened. When he gave commands, men automatically obeyed. If his face showed the slightest displeasure, men turned pale. If he spoke with displeasure, they trembled. And if he ever raised his voice, their bowels would give way. Pinsir nodded and smiled as Alva gave this description of his former master. Hope wondered if he had seen all of these reactions personally. Alva continued, I believe that, had my oldest brother lived, he would have had the same mastery over men. I greatly wish he was here to lead us, so I could simply follow him. But before you is not Alsaladene the 26th, nor Alsaladene the 27th. Before you is Alvadene. I have no power of presence. I lead with my sword, and men follow me because they see what my sword can do. If men are to follow me, I cannot lead from the back. I must lead from the front. Will your own counsel suffice for this decision? Neera asked, pushing dangerously hard. Most of my generals are here. If any of them disagree with this, they are free to speak. How can we question what you say when we stand as proof of it? Pryor asked. And how can men follow Alvadene if he falls? Neera asked. I can only speak for myself, Bonson said. If Alva falls, I will follow him still. I will try to live as I believe he would have lived until it is time for me to die as I believe he would have died. This silenced Neera's objections, but Alva understood her mind and spoke gently. Neera, I know what's bothering you. I have a fiancée whom you dearly love, and you would not see her endure the pain of losing her husband. But you must understand. Hope knows who I am. It is for this that she loves me, and she wouldn't wish me to be anything else. Hope shook her head to agree that she wouldn't, though there were tears in her eyes. We both understand that there is something greater than ourselves going on, and I must fight as Alva Dene. And I will fight at your side if you'll let me, Hope said. You will fight, Alva replied, but you must stand behind us to press us on as the ancient luminaries did in the days of Daivan and Alsala the First. I'm not afraid, Hope said. I know, Alva replied, but your power is greater than the sword. We must all serve our role. But I promise you this, battle is the only time we will not be side by side. Neera bowed graciously and made her apologies for questioning Alva's leadership. He told her she had no reason to apologize and that he would always value her counsel. Eventually it was time for everyone to go to bed, but Neera had one more conversation to have before the evening was over. After seeing Hope safely to her tent, she went to ask for a private word with Hellel. "What can I do for you, Neera?" he asked. "My lord," she said, "I know that I have even less right to question you than I do Alva, but when will they finally be allowed to be married?" "When it is time," Hellel answered. "And when will that time be?" she persisted. "When I say it is time." "But my lord, today was only the beginning. The war is about to begin. The way Alva taunts death, death must catch up with him sometime. Hope deserves at least a few months or even weeks of happiness before that happens. She deserves a child. Think what a child of both Hope and Alva, a luminary Danae, might mean for the kingdom." "I understand those things, and they will marry when it is time," Hellel said. "I beg you to consider letting them marry immediately, even tomorrow. I beg you." "You have made your point, Neera. I understand that you disagree with my judgment. If you cannot stand my decisions, your service has always been voluntary." Neera's eyes flashed with anger. A lesser man than Hellel could not have withstood her gaze. "That is an outrageous thing for you to say to me, Hellel." She said this using his name without the address of Lord for the very first time. "I meant no offense," he said, "but you have been recognized as a queen in this land. I am not sure it is right for me to retain you in service. We both know full well what you meant. My lord, my place is and will always be with Hope. This places me at your service until she is married, and I have never wanted anything else. What I told King Tyagan was true. To care for Hope is to be a queen. I will accept your decisions, however hard that might be, but do not ever speak to me about leaving your service." "I apologize," Hellel said. "I have no wish to hurt you, but you have always accepted my decisions, and I must ask you to do so now." "I will. I don't understand, and I wish you would explain, but I will accept your decisions as always." "Thank you," Hellel said. It was clear that Hellel had no intention of explaining. They said goodnight and went their separate ways. Neera's thoughts were full of her fears, of the stubbornness of men, and of her own thankfulness that she had never remarried.